Welcome to today's Explainer, where we're going to dive right into something truly profound. Think about every passing thought you have, every piece of code you write, every poem you read, or even just cheering in a stadium with thousands of other fans. We usually brush these off as completely invisible, fleeting moments. But what if they actually have a tangible, energetic weight? What if all of our mental and emotional outputs literally gather in this unseen layer enveloping our planet? Well, today, we are exploring exactly that. We're diving into the concept of the psychosphere.
Here is how we're breaking it down today. First, we'll go inside the human psychosphere. Then, we'll look at the thought forms of human logic, followed by the vibrations of emotion. Fourth, we'll explore egregores, which is our collective power. And finally, we'll wrap up with the final feedback loop.
Section 1. Inside the human psychosphere. Okay, so the core idea here is that the psychosphere acts as this subtle bridge between our dense, physical world and the higher spiritual realms. Imagine it as a living, breathing repository that wraps around the entire globe. It's packed with the mental and emotional energy of literally every human being. If you're familiar with string theory, where multiple dimensions interact through vibrating strings, the psychosphere is actually pretty similar. It's the precise intersection where our mental energy and extra-dimensional forces meet. So it's much finer than physical matter, but definitely denser than pure spirit.
And within this energetic space, our individual ideas manifest as personal, temporary thought forms. Every single time you focus your intention or feel a deep emotion, or even just dig your heels into a rigid belief, you are actively generating a thought form. They are the basic building blocks of this astral layer. But for an individual, these thought forms are usually pretty fleeting. They pop into existence, vibrate at whatever frequency matches your mood or logic, and then, as soon as you get distracted, they just kind of fade away.
But here's where it gets wild. When massive groups of people share a thought form, it transforms into an egregore. An egregore is essentially a supercharged, enduring thought form. When thousands or millions of people focus their intention, belief, and emotions on the exact same concept, say a massive sporting event, a religion, or a cultural tradition, all that energy pools together. It becomes a lasting entity that actually develops its own gravitational pull. And crazy enough, it begins to influence the mental states of the very people who created it.
Visionary psychologist Dan Siegel actually hit the nail on the head regarding this interconnectedness. He noted that the mind is a relational process and that defining the self merely as a singular noun means we're fundamentally missing the bigger picture. We aren't just isolated islands trapped inside our own skulls. Our minds are deeply relational, constantly pouring energy into the psychosphere and feeding right back off the egregores swirling around us.
Section 2. Thought forms of human logic. Let's ground this a bit and look at the highly structured analytical side of the human mind. Think about the shared struggles of PhD students, relying on coffee to survive, the perpetual crushing stress of deadlines, speaking in hyper-specific academic jargon. When thousands of academics globally share this exact same mental framework and daily grind, they aren't just relating to each other. They are actively generating a highly structured, dense vibration. They're creating an egregore of academia that subtly shapes the behavior and expectations of the very next generation of students walking through the door.
Let's take it a step further into AI and machine learning. The cold, calculating architectures we build here represent incredibly dense vibrations of human thought. Think about supervised learning, where we hand an algorithm labeled puzzle pieces and explicitly teach it how to connect them. Contrast that with unsupervised learning, where we essentially just throw a giant bag of blank pieces at the computer and say, figure out the patterns yourself. The intense, laser-focused human intention required to design these mathematical architectures, that creates some of the most rigid, highly ordered thought forms currently hanging out in our psychosphere.
And you can literally see human reasoning projected into this code. It's kind of like a student studying for an exam. If an AI model overfits, it's basically memorized the textbook word for word without understanding the underlying concepts, so it totally freezes when you ask it a new question. If it underfits, it just flat out failed to grasp the lesson at all. Mapping out these concepts creates a massive thought form generated by the global tech community, vibrating purely with analytical logic.
If we zoom out chronologically, it's clear this isn't just a recent trend. The human drive to automate has been a persistent, evolving egregore for centuries. It kicked off in the early 1800s with the Jacquard loom using punch cards to weave fabric. Then it evolved into programmable computers in the mid-20th century. And now, obviously, cognitive AI.
This centuries-long obsession with getting machines to do our heavy lifting without manual intervention is an absolutely massive historical egregore that has, frankly, completely structured modern society.
Section 3. The vibrations of emotion.
Okay, let's completely switch gears and strip away the dense logic for a second to look at the ethereal plane of human emotion. Listen to this raw, romantic poetry. The sight of you makes my thoughts bleed. I mean, wow. This isn't structured or calculated. It's visceral. It's passionate. It's totally chaotic. When a poet channels this kind of agonizing love and a reader deeply connects with it, they create an emotional thought form. It resonates purely on feeling, injecting a completely different, much wilder texture into our collective energetic field compared to, say, a coding tutorial.
And think about how fictional narratives play into this. Take this hypothetical story of a character named Bloom. He lives in Nighthaven, a world of perpetual twilight where everyone only knows touch, taste, smell, and sound. But Bloom is born with the unique ability to actually perceive light. The collective imagination it takes to write, to read, and to vividly visualize this alternate reality literally paints brand new hues into the psychosphere.
In the story, Bloom's people fear what they don't understand, so he's exiled. But journeying with his friend Sky, they encounter these winged beings and finally witness a sunrise for the very first time. Stories like this are so much more than just entertainment. That shared emotional catharsis we experience when a character breaks through the darkness, it creates a benevolent, uplifting wave of energy that actively enriches our collective consciousness.
Section 4. Egregores, our collective power.
Now, what happens when these shared emotions merge on a global scale? Look at the 2030 World Cup. It is the ultimate example of an egregore. You have Morocco bringing its dynamic Medinas and traditional music, Spain offering flamenco and old world charm, and Portugal contributing medieval castles and deeply emotional fado music. When millions, maybe billions of fans around the world focus their collective attention on this joint event, they are feeding an egregore of unprecedented cultural unity. It is a massive, pulsating thought form entirely fueled by international passion.
But here's the reality check. Egregores can be economically uneven in the physical world. Despite all this global passion, the sports industry currently accounts for only about 1% of the GDP in African nations like Morocco. So Africa acts as this massive talent nursery for the global sports egregore, injecting immense athletic energy into European and American leagues. Yet the actual financial energy returning to the continent is completely disproportionate. It's a fascinating reminder that while the psychosphere thrives on shared emotion, our physical translation of that energy isn't always fair.
Section 5. The final feedback loop. Let's talk about the lifespan of these energetic forces. Think about the ancient Stoic wisdom of Marcus Aurelius. Written nearly 2,000 years ago, he proposed that even our enemies are partakers of the exact same universal mind. That profound realization is a thought form of incredible resilience. Because humanity has continuously read, studied, and believed in Stoic philosophy century after century, this specific egregore has literally never died. It's still out there right now, exerting a calming, rational influence on anyone who taps into it.
Even bizarre old fairy tales leave a lasting mark. You know the brothers Grimm tale Hans and Luck? Hans trades a fortune in silver for a horse, then the horse for a cow, then a pig, then a goose, and finally he trades the goose for a heavy, useless grindstone, which he drops in a river and celebrates finally being free. The counterintuitive logic of this story has survived for generations. It functions as an ongoing cultural egregore, constantly challenging our modern, rigid obsession with material wealth.
So what happens when an egregore actually dies? When we stop believing in an outdated theory or a cultural panic subsides, the energy wanes, but it leaves behind what's called astral debris, just empty husks lingering in the psychosphere. The danger here is that these empty shells can be hijacked. Lower, parasitic energies can fill them up to spark mass hysteria or totally irrational fears. But on the flip side, benevolent forces can also sweep in and recycle that residual energy to help restore harmony to our collective mind.
Which leaves us with a pretty massive question. Knowing that every single logical theory, every passionate poem, and every shared cultural moment directly shapes this invisible world, what will your contribution be? The psychosphere is a constant feedback loop. You shape it with your focus, and it subtly shapes you right back. Whether you're writing lines of code, uniting with friends over a soccer match, or sharing a deep emotional truth, you are throwing stones into the astral pond. So the next time you engage in a deeply held belief or get swept up in mass emotion, ask yourself, what kind of egregore are you feeding today?